Hey, thanks for joining us again for another episode of LokadTV. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about decisions and introducing the concept of silos. Now, this might be a concept that's quite new to a number of our viewers, and it's made all the more interesting by the fact it's not about doing something better in particular, but it's about having the framework in place to do things better in general. Today, many supply chain consultants are charging absolute fortunes, pushing operational decisions that dramatically change the way businesses are structured. So Johannes, before we get on to whether these operational decisions are actually needed, perhaps you can kick things off by clarifying what it is exactly you mean by silos.
So silos are like an emergent property of some very old ideas that are basically the division of labor and a kind of a divide and conquer approach to the, I would say, to the corporate environment. So what do I mean by that? I mean that typically you have, for companies to grow, they have to organize themselves. And one simple way to set up the organization is to have both vertical and horizontal, I would say, splits in the organization. So by vertical, I mean that if you're a fashion company, the vertical split would be to have, for example, a division that do shoes and another that does shirts. That would be your vertical split. The horizontal split would be that you have people who do forecasting and some others that do replenishment. And basically you have like a matrix of the two, and that's your divide and conquer. And every single box that you have in your matrix is actually or can be a silo.
Okay. So given the truly international way that we're doing business these days, it's easy to see how supply chains can get very complex. I mean, if you look at the example of a large multinational, for example, they're working across many different countries, many different cultures, so it's easy to see how decisions are becoming fragmented. But what sort of decisions are we actually talking about here?
So yes, in supply chains, there are many different types of decisions. You have, I would say, the super high-level decisions, such as, for example, when is it time to enter a new market, to enter a new country to sell your stuff, for example. This type of decisions are very rarely fragmented. Why? Because they bubble up to the CEO and his or her board, and so basically it's a very tight decision that is done very frequently. So usually it's not very fragmented. Where the fragmentation happens is for the very mundane, very routine decisions. And in supply chains, it typically involves literally thousands or even millions a day. So what are we talking of specifically? It's to decide when to buy, how much to buy, where to buy from, where to keep the stock for any pile of inventory you have. Should you move it or keep it where it is? Should you liquidate this stock, this inventory? Should you actually decide to lower your price, to increase your price? And just imagine all those decisions, you need to take them every single day for every single product, for every single location, for every single channel. And it's never ending. So it's literally, for companies that are of significant size, it's literally millions of decisions that needs to be taken every single day, and there lies, I believe, the true fragmentations in those very mundane supply chain decisions.
Okay, so we're talking about the most basic supply chain decisions, such as the amount of stock that actually needs to be replenished in a given day. But these decisions are still just being made by one department, like the purchasing team. So why are these decisions actually becoming fragmented?
That's interesting, and that's you can have an illusion of having, just because there is at the end of the chain, you have decision being made by a software or a team or something. You have the illusion that it's relatively like I would say a decision that is taken in one place. But the reality is that the decision is fragmented by design. By design, I mean by its very construction. So, and again, it's all about this vertical and horizontal fragmentation, again, in the design of the decision. So let's see a bit how it turns out in terms of fragmentation. We have the vertical, where to fragment your decision would be, for example, to have quarterly budgets for divisions. So you have a purchasing budget for the division that do shoes, and you have a quarterly budget for the division that do shirts. So you've put a constraint in the middle, and that fragments your decision, although it's not obvious. And then the horizontal way is would be, for example, forecasting versus replenishment. Actually, you have one team that does, the forecast, which is basically the average future projected demand. I mean, it's not the way we do it at Lokad, but in many companies, that's the way it does. The way a company thinks about a forecast, like the average future demand. And then you have another team that is basically dealing with replenishment, and that does another part of the calculation, which is the safety stock. And so your decision, which is in many systems that are basically sum of demand plus safety stock for replenishment, actually your decision, which is just what you order, is a quantity, but it's built on many parts that have been produced by possibly many teams. So that's how you end up with the fragmentation, although in the end, you just have someone that issue a purchase order. But the way this purchase order has been constructed is very fragmented.
Okay, that kind of makes sense, but perhaps it would make a bit more sense for our viewers if we had a practical example. So could you give us a practical example of vertical fragmentation and how businesses are actually losing money on this?
Okay, so vertical, so we are back to, let's say, our fashion companies, the fashion company who is producing shoes and shirts. And back to those quarterly budgets. Why is a company losing money because of a quarterly budget? The answer is, in fashion, it's all about trends and being, very fresh with respect of the trends. If you want to be fashionable, you should not be wearing the stuff that were fashionable last year. You have to be like up to the latest trend. That's pretty much the very definition of fashion. So if you have a quarterly budget, then more or less by design, you're a quarter late for every single trend. So that means, and what does that mean in practice, being a quarter late? It means that the thing that is becoming the super hot trend right now, it doesn't have a budget big enough to accommodate the demand, because again, you cannot perfectly anticipate, what will be the future trends. So there is a degree of surprise. So so basically it means that if you can't purchase enough of this stuff that is super hot right now, you're not going to be able to sell as much of what the market demands. And then just imagine the opposite for the division that is selling something that is not so hot. Well, they have a budget that is an excess of budget, but things are not going very well for them. So it's a very human thing. Do you think they are going to willingly give up their budget? They already have a problem of not being able to sell enough. So from their perspective, they have no reason to actually get rid of give up on the budget they have, because they expect to maybe turn around the situation. Maybe they will, maybe they won't, but clearly the company as a whole is losing because the company, because of those vertical splits, is 1 quarter late, and it plays very differently in different areas, but the problem is pretty much the same.
Okay, so the main drawback of vertical fragmentation is the lack of agility that a company has and sort of the slowness they have to respond to changes in the marketplace. I mean, I guess they need to forecast further in the future. So how about horizontal fragmentation? Have you got an example of that too?
Yes. So let's take very good question. Let's take another angle with, for example, a supermarket, selling wide range of products. And let's consider the specific case of diapers. Diapers are very interesting. So diapers is, if you're a young parent, diapers is a mission critical item. If you have like a newborn infant, you have a very sort of crappy problem, literally actually, if you run out of diapers. So it's a very sensitive product, quite expensive. I mean, for many people, it's an investment. and it's mission critical. So what happens? Those horizontal fragmentation we are talking about, it's about having a team that does the demand forecast and one that does, let's say, replenishment, which involves safety stock on top of demand. So why do we have a specific problem in a supermarket for diapers? Well, the reality is because it's a mission critical item, if your supermarket run out of diapers, the young mom, they are going to resent you for that. They are going to resent you in a very specific way. Probably you're going to lose the entire basket of stuff that they were about to buy in the supermarket. But if they resent you strong enough, maybe you're going to lose the baskets for the next 5 to 10 years. So it's an incredibly asymmetric problem. You have one stuff that is missing, and the young mom, she resent you so much that you lose a decade of business with her and her family. So super, super asymmetric. And guess what? The people who have I would say, the most accurate insight in this matter are neither forecasting folks nor replenishment folks. They are the marketing people, because they know exactly what sort of needs people have. I mean, that's what they study all day. That's what smart marketing is about, to truly understand the market and the client in this case. So the bottom line is we have this massive asymmetry and nobody really accountable for it. And you take a decision that is a purchase order without really factoring all these super asymmetrical costs. So you see, the way you've horizontally fragmented your decision means that you can lose a lot of money by actually having customer resenting you because your decision is not smart enough. So that's how you can lose actually a lot of money in the design of this decision, which looks kind of unified but isn't.
Okay. Well, I'm glad I don't have to worry too much about diapers for the coming future anyway. So it's all about how the decision itself is not becoming fragmented, but it's all about how that decision emerges. It's a bit like starting out with, say, really great ingredients, but having a bad recipe. So like at the end of the day, no matter how good your ingredients are, especially if I'm cooking, it's not going to guarantee a great meal. So let's go back to this problem of silos. That's a problem that's kind of existed for decades now. Why are companies still struggling with this problem?
So they're still struggling because the solution, I believe, to this problem is simple but not easy at all. And that's, by the way, simple usually doesn't mean easy. So the solution is simple, is you need a massive boost of productivity. And why do you need a massive boost of productivity? I mean, you have to go back of why do you have silos in the first place? You have those silos, both, it's a whole matrix, horizontal and vertical, because your company is large and it cannot deliver all the things it wants to deliver with a much lower number of people. So as you grow, you have this division of labor thing, you divide and conquer, and so you have a lot of people, and so you need to have all those divisions within your company. But it boils down to productivity. If you were able to have tools that would massively boost productivity, you would not need to have those things as divided, as fragmented as they are. And by the way, the analogy that you're mentioning about having a chef is very, very interesting. Because if you've seen any TV show about those chefs in grand restaurants, and it makes great TV shows. Why? Because they work so fast. They're cutting things so they are so incredibly productive. And you would think, why do you need to be so incredibly fast at cooking to be a great chef? And the answer is fragmentation. There is even an expression for that. Too many cooks spoil the broth. And that's why if you want to be a great chef, in the end, there is just one recipe. So you can only have, one chef and maybe 2 or 3 assistants, and this is it. So that means that you have an enormous amount of work to do for your great recipe, but you cannot have 200 people working on the thing. It's not going to taste well. So you need to have like a tiger team of just a few people who have massive productivity, and that's why they are so good, and that makes a great TV show about it, because it's quite entertaining to see them working so fast. But there is really a lesson for supply chain, is that if you want to have great supply chain decisions, you need to have maybe on those specific decisions, few people that have massive productivity, and so that the resulting decisions are very good. And by the way, shameless plug, it's exactly what Lokad is about as a software platform. It's a whole software platform that is dedicated to the productivity of those supply chain scientists. You know, just like we discussed last week, we don't have data scientists, we have supply chain scientists that are way cooler.
Yep. Well, I'm glad we're talking about food anyway, because I'm currently completely addicted to Chef's Table on Netflix. So it's a bit of an addiction of mine at the minute. But going back to that productivity, you're saying that's the one thing that's holding back great tacticians from making great business decisions. What is holding the productivity back? How can the productivity be improved?
So it's, again, I think it's a simple problem, but it's a very complex one. So it's death by 1,000 cuts. So it's not just one thing that drags your productivity down. It's a lot of them. So let's enumerate a bit, shall we? So first, you have to deal with data, lots of data. So maybe terabytes of data. So the question is, can you process those terabytes of data in minutes or even in seconds, ideally? And usually you can't, and you can't because you don't have big data processing capabilities. So first, and by the way, what does that mean that you need 20 minutes to process 1 terabyte? It means that whoever is doing the calculation is just going to sit and wait for 20 minutes until the results comes out of the machine or the system. So computing performance is a feature for productivity. You need to have some stuff that are like lightning fast, because it's what it takes to be productive. So that's the big data angle, which, by the way, that's one of the reasons why in 2010 we moved Lokad toward cloud computing, because it was access to tremendous computing resources just to solve this very problem. Then we have the forecasting angle. So the forecasting angle is typically the productivity can be abysmal. Why? Because you have so many edge cases. You know, if you have your forecasting engine, but you need to special case products that have limited history, so that's a special case. And then products that have, let's say, less than a month of sales history. And then you have another special case for products that have not been launched yet. And then you need a special case for products that are about to have a promotion. And then you need a special case for products that had stockouts in the past, so the history comes with tons of bias, etc. So you have all those edge cases. And if you need to have like a data scientist that manually tweak all those edge cases, productivity is just super, super low. For example, you should never have a forecasting engine that requires from you to manually tweak seasonality. You should just extract seasonality from the data. But it's not the only problem. So edge cases are one problem, but you have an entire other class of problem. And that's what those probabilistic forecasts that we produce are about. The problem is that typically you end up with what-if scenarios. You know, companies can waste a lot of time to say, oh, we want to do what if this, what if that, etc. And the problem is that if you start to enumerate all the scenarios, there is like an endless stream of scenarios, and it takes such a massive amount of time to just enumerate all those scenarios. So the solution is to directly have a forecast that addresses all possible futures with probabilities. This is exactly what probabilistic forecast is about. And again, still enumerating, so I'm sorry, it's a very long enumeration, but it's a lot of stuff in that. Then you have problems with a lot of non-linear behavior, such as, for example, you have those minimal order quantities. You know, the suppliers say you need to order at least 500 units. So it's like a cap on the minimal, on the MOQ that you need to order. So this is a weird constraint, and here the way we address it is by having a non-linear numerical solver. So we have even something called the MOQ solver just for that. So addressing these productivity angles is having a whole software solution that delivers productivity at every single stage. So it's a lot of things, and that's why, by the way, Lokad is a fairly complex piece of software end to end.
Okay, so what you're basically saying is that with the right software, a supply chain scientist has got the tools to make better decisions without having to use lots of extra resource. I mean, that's definitely good news for companies that don't want stockouts in the future, but they don't want to have to double their headcount in order to prevent it. So if it really does boil down to just a few key members of the supply chain, what are you going to do with the rest of the supply chain staff? Are you going to fire the rest of them, or how's that going to work?
That's very funny, because every time, I've seen in my professional life discuss about productivity, there is like the journalistic take on the case, which is, oh, productivity is improving, we are just going to fire half of the company. And guess what? It's not exactly what happens, because just think of it as from the perspective of the CEO. Unless you're a relatively dysfunctional CEO, how do you see all your people? The people you're training them, they have economic values. They are economic assets for the value of the company. Your company is worth something because they are valuable people in the company who actually make the company work. It's not, the company is not a machine, it's the group of people. So what is the most rational answer to, we have something like a tool to make people more productive, so more productive means more valuable, and people say, oh, we have suddenly a solution to make people more valuable, let's throw half of the people out of the window. No, this is just so wrong. This is not, it's not because you discard half of your assets that suddenly by some weird magic your company would be worth more. So what is most likely, and again, I'm talking of a company that is non-dysfunctional, where people are actually doing things that make sense, where they are valuable in a high-level sense. Obviously, if it's completely nonsensical, then it's a completely different sort of problem. But I'm assuming I'm talking of a company that is like healthy and who just want to be even greater. So for this company, what is going to happen is that they are going to use maybe those supply chain scientists to come up with better decisions. But those supply chain scientists, they don't operate in a vacuum. So they need, for example, they need better data. And it's a lot of effort to collect data more reliably, to maybe collect more data quantitatively. And then you have, for example, you want to collaborate more with your suppliers. For example, you want to negotiate your minimal order quantities, because if you negotiate something that is better, maybe you can make the life of your supplier easier, so that the supplier can in turn give you a lower price, not because you just bargain with your supplier, but because you have lowered the price of what you're about to buy in the first place. And same thing can happen on the customer side. By understanding your client better, you can improve the whole service, which is not just about making the thing cheaper. Sometimes people are willing to pay for things that are more expensive because they get more out of it. But the more can be faster delivery, it can be more reliable delivery, it can be even different class of good properties. It can be delivered, for example, at a precise time of the day, so that it's less, it's more accommodating for you. So there is many angles, and I believe with the productivity that we can deliver, from better supply chain scientists, companies will be able to spend more time on things that makes more sense, as opposed again to spending more time on tweaking numbers on Excel sheets, which barely makes any sense at all.
Okay, well, I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap things up for today, but thanks for a really interesting discussion. We've talked about fashion, we've talked about restaurants, we've even talked about diapers. So it's definitely an entertaining discussion
and
today.
TV shows about cuisine also.
I mean, yeah, it's only the best.
Yes.
So hopefully that's given you at home a better understanding of both vertical and horizontal fragmentation and how it can affect the world of supply chains. Definitely silos is a very interesting topic, given the way that their resistance change. So that's all for this week, but we'll be back very soon with another episode. Until then, we'll see you very soon. Bye-bye.